Good evening. Welcome to day 13 of Reading Challenge, chapter 24. Yes, there is something in me hateful, repulsive, thought Levin, as he came away from the Chebetskis and walked in the direction of his brother's lodgings. And I don't get on with the other people. Pride, they say. No, I have no pride. If I had any pride, I should not have put myself in such a position. And he pictured to himself Vronsky, happy, good natured, clever, and self possessed. Certainly never placed in the awful position in which he had been that evening. Yes, she was bound to choose him. So it had to be, and I cannot complain of anyone or anything. I am myself to blame. What right had I to imagine she would care to join her life to mine? Who am I and what am I? And nobody, not wanted by anyone, nor of use to anybody. And he recalled his brother Nikolai and dwelt with pleasure on the thought of him. Isn't he right that everything in the world is base and loathsome? And are we fair in our judgment of brother Nikolai? Of course, from the point of view of Prokofy, seeing him in a torn cloak and tipsy, he is a despicable person. But I know him differently. I know his soul and know that we are like him. And I, instead of going to seek him out, went out to dinner and came here. Levin walked up to a lamppost, read his brother's address, which was in his pocket, and called a sledge. All the long way to his brother's, Levin vividly recalled all the facts similar to him of his brother Nikolai's life. He remembered how his brother, while at the university and for a year afterwards, had, in spite of these jeers of his companions, lived like a monk, strictly observing all religious rites, services, and fasts, and avoiding every sort of pleasure, especially women. And afterwards, how he had all at once broken out. He had associated with the most horrible people and rushed into the most senseless debauchery. He remembered later the scandal over a boy whom he had taken from the country to bring up, and in a fit of rage had so violently beaten that proceedings were brought against him for unlawful wounding. Then he recalled the scandal with a sharper, to whom he had lost money and given a promissory note, and against whom he had himself lodged a complaint, asserting that he had cheated him. This was the money Sergei Ivanovich had paid. Then he remembered how he had spent a night in the lockup for disorderly conduct in the street. He remembered the shameful proceedings he had tried to get up against his brother Sergei Ivanovich, accusing him of not having paid him his share of his mother's fortune. And the last scandal, when he had gone to a western province in an official capacity and had got into trouble for assaulting a village elder. It was all horribly disgusting. Yet to Levin it appeared not at all in the same disgusting light as it inevitably would to choose who did not know Nikolai, did not know all his story, did not know his hurt. Levin remembered that when Nikolai had been in the devout stage, the period of fast and monks and church services when he was seeking in religion a support and a curb for his passionate temperament. Everyone, far from encouraging him, had jeered at him, and he too with the others. They had teased him, called him Noah and monk, and when he had broken out, no one had helped him, but everyone had turned away from him with horror and disgust. Levin felt that, in spite of all the ugliness of his life, his brother Nikolai, in his soul, in the very depth of his soul, was no more in the wrong than the people who despised him. He was not to blame for having been born with his unbridled temperament and his somehow limited intelligence, but he had always wanted to be good. I will tell him everything without reserve, and I will make him speak without reserve too. And I will show him that I love him, and so understand him. Levin resolved to himself as towards 11 o'clock he reached the hotel of which he had the address at the top 12 and 13. The porter answered Levin's inquiry. At home? Sure to be at home. The door of number 12 was half open, and there came out into the streak of light thick fumes of cheap poor tobacco, and the sound of a voice, unknown to Levin, but he knew at once that his brother was there. He heard his cough. As he went in the door, the unknown voice was saying, It all depends with how much judgment and knowledge the things done. Constantine Levin looked in at the door and saw that the speaker was a young man with an immense shock of hair, wearing a Russian jerkin, and that a pockmarked woman in a woolen gown without collar or cuffs was sitting on the sofa. His brother was not to be seen. Constantine felt a sharp pang at his heart at the thought of the strange company in which his brother spent his life. No one had heard him, and Constantine taking off his galoshes instead of what the gentleman in the jerkin was saying, he was speaking of some enterprise. Well, the devil flay him, the privileged classes. His brother's voice responded with a cough. Masha, get us some supper and some wine if there's any left, or else go and get some. The woman rose, came out from behind the screen, and saw Constantine. There's some gentleman, Nikolai Dmitrievich, she said. Whom do you want? Said the voice of Nikolai Levin angrily. It's I, answered Constantine Levin, coming forward into the light. Who's I? Nikolai's voice said again, still more angrily. He could be heard getting up hurriedly, stumbling against something, and Levin saw facing him in the doorway the big scared eyes and the huge thin stooping figure of his brother, so familiar and yet astonishing in its weirdness and sickliness. He was even thinner than 3 years before, and Constantine Levin had seen him last. He was wearing a short coat, and his hands and big bones seemed huger than ever. His hair had grown thinner, the same straight mustaches hid his lips. The same eyes gazed strangely and naively at his visitor. Ah, Kostya! He exclaimed suddenly, recognizing his brother, and his eyes lit up with joy. But the same second he looked around at the young man, and gave the nervous jerk of his head and neck that Constantine knew so well, as if his neckband heard him, and a quite different expression, wild, suffering, and cruel, rested on his emaciated face. I wrote to you and Sergey Ivanovich both that I know. I wrote to you and Sergey Ivanovich both that I don't know you and don't want to know you. What is it you want? He was not at all the same as Constantine had been fancying him. The worst and the most tiresome part of his character, what made all relations with him so difficult, had been forgotten by Constantine Levin when he thought of him, and now, when he saw his face and especially that nervous twitching of his head, he remembered it all. I didn't want to see you for nothing, he answered timidly. I've simply come to see you. His brother's timidity obviously softened Nikolai. His lips twitched. Oh, so that's it, he said. Well, come and sit down. Like some supper, Masha? Bring supper for three. No, stop a minute. Do you know who this is? He said, addressing his brother and indicating the gentleman in the jerkin. This is Mr. Kritsky, my friend from Kiev, a very remarkable man. Persecuted by the He's persecuted by the police, of course, because he's not a scoundrel. And he looked around in the way he always did at everyone in the room. Seeing that the woman standing in the doorway was moving to go, he shouted to her, wait a minute, I said, and with the inability to express himself, the incoherence that Constantine knew so well, he began with another look round at everyone to tell his brother Kritsky's story. How he had been expelled from the university for starting a benefit society for the poor students and Sunday schools, and how he had afterwards been a teacher in a peasant school, and how he had been driven out of that too, and he had always and had afterwards been contempt for something. You are of the Kiev University, said Konstantin Levin to Kritsky, to break the awkward silence that followed. Yes, I was of Kiev, Kritsky replied angrily, his face darkening. And this woman? Nikolai Levin interrupted him, pointing to her. Is the partner of my life, Maria Nikolaevna. I took her out of a bad house, and he jerked his neck saying this, but I love her and respect her, and anyone who wants to know me, he added, raising his voice and knitting his brows. I beg to love her and respect her. She's just the same as my wife, just the same. So now you know whom you have to do with, and if you think you are lowering yourself, well, he is the floor, there's the door. And again his eyes traveled inquiringly over all of them. Why? Why I should be lowering myself? I don't understand. Then Masha, tell them to bring supper, 3 portions, spirits and wine. No, wait a minute. No, it doesn't matter. Go along. Chapter 25. So you see, pursued Nikolai Levin, painfully wrinkling his forehead and twitching. It was obviously difficult for him to think of what to say and do. Here, do you see? He pointed to some sort of iron bars, fastened together with strings, lying in a corner of the room. Do you see that? That's the beginning of a new thing we are going to. It's a productive association. Constantine scarcely heard him. He looked into his thickly consumptive face and he was more and more sorry for him. And he could not force himself to listen to what his brother was telling him about the association. He saw that this association was a mere anchor to save him from self-contempt. Nikolai Levin went on talking. You know that capital oppresses the laborer. The laborer with us, the peasants, bear all the burden of labor and are so placed that however much they work, they can't escape from their position of beast of burden. All the profits of labor on which they might improve their position and gain for themselves, and after that education, all the surplus values are taken from them by the capitalist. And society is so constituted that the harder they work, the greater the profit of the merchants and landowners, while they stay beast of burden to the end. And that state of things must be changed. He finished up and he looked questioningly at his brother. Yes, of course, said Constantine, looking at the patch of red that had come out on his brother's projecting cheekbones. And so we are founding a locksmith association where all the production and profit and the chief instruments of production will be in common. Where is the association to be? Asked Constantine Levin. In the village of Vosdram, Kazan government. But why in a village? In the villages, I think there is plenty of work as it is. Why a locksmith association in a village? Why? Because the peasants are just as much slaves as they were ever were. And that's why you and Sergey Ivanovich don't like people to try and get them out of their slavery, said Nikolai Levin, exasperated by the objection. Konstantin Levin sighed, looking meanwhile about the cheerless and dirty room. This sigh seemed to exasperate Nikolai still more. I know you I know you were and Sergey Ivanovich aristocratic views. I know that he applies all the power of his intellect to justify existing evils. No, and what do you talk of Sergey Ivanovich for? Said Levin smiling. Sergey Ivanovich, I will tell you what for. Nikolai Levin shrieked suddenly at the name of Sergey Ivanovich. I will tell you what for, but what's the use of talking? There's only one thing. What did you come to me for? You looked down on this, and you're welcome to, and go away. In God's name, go away. He shrieked, getting up. He shrieked, getting up from his chair, and go away. I don't look down on it all. I don't look down on it at all, said Konstantin Levin timidly. I don't even dispute it. At that instant, Maria Nikolaevna came back. Nikolai Levin looked around angrily at her. She went quickly to him and whispered something. I'm not well. I've grown irritable, said Nikolai Levin, getting calmer and breathing painfully. And then you talk to me of Sergey Ivanovich and his article. It's such rubbish, such lying, such self-deception. What can a man write of justice who knows nothing of it? Have you read his article? He asked Kritsky, sitting down again at the table and moving back off half of it the scattered cigarettes so as to clear the space. I have not read it. I have not read it. Kritsky responded gloomily, obviously not desiring to enter into the conversation. Why not? Said Nikolai Levin, now turning with exasperation upon Kritsky. Because I didn't see the use of wasting my time over it. Oh, but excuse me, how did you know it would be wasting your time? That's article too deep for many people. That's to say it's over their head. But with me, it's another thing. I see through his ideas. I see through his ideas and I know where its weakness lies. Everyone was mute. Kritsky got up deliberately and reached his cap. Won't you have supper? All right, goodbye. Come round tomorrow with the locksmith. Kritsky had hardly gone out when Nikolai Levin smiled and winked. He's no good either, he said. I see, of course, but at that instant Kritsky at that door called him. "What do you want now?" he said, and went out to him in the passage. Left alone with Maria Nikolaevna, Levin turned to her. "Have you been long with my brother?" he said to her. "Yes, more than a year. Nikolai Dmitrievич's health has become very poor. Nikolai Dmitrievich drinks a great deal," she said. "That's it. That's it. How does he drink?" "Drinks vodka, and it's bad for him." "And a great deal," whispered Levin. "Yes," she said, looking timidly towards the doorway, where Nikolai Levin had reappeared. "What were you talking about?" he said, knitting his brows and turning his scared eyes from one to other. "What was it?" "Oh, nothing," Constantine answered in confusion. "Oh, if you don't want to say, don't. Only it's no good you are talking to her. He is a wench, and you are a gentleman," he said with a jerk of his neck. "You understand everything, I see, and have taken stock of everything, and look with a commiseration on my shortcomings," he began again, raising his voice. "Nikolai Dmitrievich, Nikolai Dmitrievich," whispered Maria Nikolaevna, again going up to him. "Oh, well. Oh, very well, very well. But where's the supper? Ah, here it is," he said, seeing a waiter with a tray. "Here, set it here," he added angrily and promptly seizing the vodka. He poured out a glassful and drank it greedily, like a drink. He turned to his brother and at once became better humored. "Well, enough of Sergey Ivanovich. I'm glad to see you, anyway. After all said and done, we are not strangers. Come, have a drink. Tell me what you are doing," he went on, greedily munching a piece of bread and pouring out another glassful. "How are you living?" "I live alone in the country, as I used to. I am busy looking after the land," answered Constantine, watching with honor the greediness with which his brother ate and drank, and trying to conceal that he noticed it. "Why don't you get married?" "I hasn't happened so," Constantine answered, reddening a little. "Why not? For me now everything is at an end. I have made a mess of my life. But this I have said, and I say still, that if my share had been given me when I needed it, my whole life would have been different." Constantine made haste to change the conversation. "Do you know your little Vanyas with me? A clerk in the counting house at Pokrovsky?" Nikolai jerked his neck and sank into thought. "Yes, tell me what's going on at Pokrovsky. Is the house standing still? And the birch trees, and our schoolroom, and Philip the gardener, is he living? Labor how I remember the arbor and the seat. Now mind now mind and don't alter anything in the house, but make haste and get married, and make everything as it is used to be again. Then I'll come and see you. Is your wife is nice? But if your wife is, then I will come and see you if your wife is nice. "But come to me now," said Levin. "How nicely we would arrange it. I would come and see you if I were sure I should not find Sergey Ivanovich." "You wouldn't find him though. I live quite independently of him." "Yes, but say what you like. You will have to choose between me and him," he said, looking timidly into his brother's face. This timidity touched Constantine. "If you want to hear my confession of faith on the subject, I tell you that in your quarrel with Sergey Ivanovich, I take neither side. You're both wrong. You're more wrong externally and he inwardly." "Ah, you say that, you see," that Nikolai shouted joyfully. "But I personally value friendly relation with you more because why? Constantine could not say that he valued it more because Nikolai was unhappy and needed affection. But Nikolai knew that this was just what he meant to say, and scowling, he took up the vodka again. "Enough, Nikolai Dmitrievich," said Maria Nikolaevna, stretching out her plump bare arm towards the descender. "Let it be. Don't insist. I will beat you," he shouted. Maria Nikolaevna smiled a sweet and good-humoured smile, which was at once reflected on Nikolai's face, and she took the bottle. "And do you suppose she understands nothing?" said Nikolai. "She understands it all better than any of us. Isn't it true there was something good and sweet in her?" "Were you never before in Moscow?" Konstantin said to her, for the sake of saying something. "Only you must not be polite and stuff with her. It frightens her. No one ever spoke to her so but the justices of the peace who tried her for trying to get out of a house of ill fame. Mercy on us, the senselessness in the world," he cried suddenly. "These new institutions, these justices of the peace, rural councils, what hideous hideousness it all is, and he began to enlarge on his encounters with the new institutions. Constantine Levin heard him, and the disbelief in the sense of all public institutions which he shared with him, and often expressed, was distasteful or to him now from his brother's lips. In another world we shall understand it all, he said lightly. In another world? Ah, I don't like that other world. I don't like it, he said, letting his scared eyes rest on his brother's eyes. Here one would think that to get out of all the baseness and the mess one's own and others' people would be a good thing, and yet I am afraid of death, awfully afraid of death, he shuddered. But do drink something. Would you like some champagne? Or shall we go somewhere? Let's go to the gypsies. Do you know I have got so fond of the gypsies and Russian songs. His speech had begun to falter, and he paused abruptly from one subject to another. Constantine, with the help of Masha, persuaded him not to go out anywhere and got him to bed hopelessly drunk. Masha promised to write to Constantine in case of need and to persuade Nikolai Levin to go and stay with his brother. Thanks for the day. We'll see you tomorrow.